What's going on, everyone? It's Bales, and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy head-to-head video. Another guest, another episode. So we got another guest, and it's the other half of the Ball Boys Fantasy AFL podcast. We saw Mitch in the last episode. Now we've got the other man, Luke. Luke, mate, how you going?
Hey, I'm good, Bales. Thanks for having me on, mate. I appreciate it. I've been following along with some of your content, and a lot of the guys you've had on have got pretty good fantasy credentials. So I don't know what you're doing talking to me, but but I'm happy to be here, mate. I'll try and offer some insight if I possibly can.
Oh, mate, happy to have you on. And it's been, yes, as you said, it's been fantastic getting people from the fantasy community on and chatting these player head-to-heads, because it's always been fun. So we're going to continue the theme. We've got another two defenders, but it's not guys that are similarly priced today. So the theme's been guys that are around the similar price, but this time we're going for a couple of guys that are going to be in the top six defenders. We're talking about Sam Docherty, who's the top price defender, or a guy that's a little bit cheaper, but potentially could be D2 or D3 or thereabouts in Angus Brayshaw. So I'll be taking Sam Docherty, and Luke will be taking Angus Brayshaw. So we're going to see who we'd pick, if we'd save the coin or if we'd go up and just pay up for the man in Sam Docherty. So, Luke, do you want to take us away with Angus Brayshaw? Why should people be saving the money and going for Angus Brayshaw in Fantasy 2023?
That's it, mate. It's interesting you talk about the fact that obviously a lot of teams have got Doc locked in at D1 there, but I can see a scenario where if you wanted to save the coin, you could actually go with Brayshaw at D1. There's a couple of things that I'll sort of allude to in a sec that might make that a bit of a tricky decision that's sort of happened in the last couple of weeks. But the thing, that we all know with Brayshaw is we look at the end of last year and the pattern of him then going into the midfield. So we saw in the last 6 games of the year, I think he went up and he averaged around that 60% CBAs, which, if he's going into the midfield and if he's averaging 60% CBAs, then I can see him being an easy 105 to one sort of 07 guy. And if you put him in that realm, then he's a lock to be in your top 6 defenders. And we all know, at the end of the day, that's what you've got to have. You've got to have the top 6 defenders in your team at some point. So the thing I think that you can probably make the case for Brayshaw over Doc is, like you said, you're saving a bit of cash. So I think that comes important, especially in some of those lines where, you might be left in a little bit of no man's land. Perhaps it's in the ruck line. Perhaps you've got sort of a Darcy Cameron and maybe you want to try and get a little bit of cash somewhere to go up to, like an English or a Marshall. That's maybe potentially somewhere, in the back line that you can save some cash. There's a few other things that I sort of think are a bit of a tick for Brayshaw. I think that there's no chance of him getting a tag if he goes into the midfield. I think you got, Track, you've got, you've got Clary in there. So him being in the midfield, I don't think sort of presents any tag target. And then the real thing, I'll be interested to get your thoughts on this as well. The real thing that I think is positive for Brayshaw this year is that even if he doesn't potentially play as much midfield time as we're all hoping, I don't think there's any chance of him going out to a wing. I think the only other option for him really is at half-back, and the scoring's not going to dry up too much at half-back. What are your kind of thoughts on that and him staying away from the wing role?
Yeah, well, I think Lockie Hunter coming in, solves that problem. I think you've got Ed Langdon, who one of the best wingers in the competition, and Lockie Hunter is also another fantastic winger. So I think those two are there. And I think even Jimmy Jordan is going to be the guy that's probably going to be that backup sort of winger that maybe plays half forward, splits time on a wing, or maybe comes on starts on the bench and comes on for one of those guys. So I think that I don't see there's any danger at all of him playing on a wing. I think it'll be half back and in the midfield. But I guess with the half-back thing, with this issue with Salem, maybe does that open up even more opportunity for Gus Brayshaw back there? But I do see that they put Petrarca forward because of their struggles up forward. So I think that's what opened up the opportunity for Gus Brayshaw in the midfield. So do you see that continuing in the midfield? Do you see Petrarca maybe doing a 50-50 split, or do you see maybe Petrarca going more back to what he was doing early in the season, more midfield, and Gus Brayshaw spending more time at half-back?
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made for both. Look, for me, with those kind of gun midfielders in the mould of Petrarca, Dustin Martin, Bontempelli, these guys who are dangerous forwards as well, I think it kind of depends on the team that you're at. There's teams around the league where if you had a player of that caliber, you'd have to play him in the midfield because you don't have other options. But at Melbourne, I kind of tend to think that there is the opportunity for Petrarca to stay as kind of in that damaging forward role. He's obviously going to spend time in the midfield, but I think that there's potential when you've got the cattle of, Brayshaw and Clary Oliver and Viney and these kind of elite midfielders, you probably do have the freedom and liberty to play Petrarca a little bit more forward, which then, my hope is that it opens up some scoring for Brayshaw in the midfield. But like you mentioned, with the Salem thing is kind of what everyone's perception is hinging on. Would you agree at the moment? It's when Salem was fit and healthy, everyone sort of thought, Brayshaw lock in the midfield. I don't necessarily, even with Salem going down, like you mentioned, I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing in the world. Like Brayshaw's shown us that when he goes down back, he still has a massive ceiling. If he's waxing down there and he's just racking up those +6s, like he could have monster games. I think at 156, with 20 marks.
Yeah, with 20 marks,
floating across half back. So the backline stuff doesn't worry me. And like you said, could the Salem thing even be a bit of a blessing in disguise? If he goes back there, he could be waxing it up. So I kind of feel comfortable in both options. And you mentioned Lockie Hunter. He's a name for me it's a big thumbs up, because it just probably means that for me, Brayshaw is safe from that wing role.
Yeah, I don't see Brayshaw going on that wing, and that was obviously where it killed his fantasy game completely. He was obviously like what would have been 4 or 5 years ago now, but he was that guy playing the midfield, and he was just racking up points, one of the best defenders like in fantasy and playing in defence as well. And then all of a sudden he got stuck onto like a defensive wing role, and really since then he just wasn't fantasy relevant at all until last year, where he went back to half back and then even pushed the midfield late in the year as well, which is fantastic for his stocks. But what do you see him in terms of average? So do you see him pushing over 100? Because he's priced at about that 99, 98 sort of range, just under 100. So do you see him going over 100 if he gets this maybe midfield role or half-back role?
Yeah, I do see him going over 100. I think the midfield role for me is more of a certainty to go over 100. So if he's locked into that midfield role like he was at in the last sort of 6 games of last season, then I'm tipping, like I said, a sort of a 105 to 107. If he goes back, I think it'll be a little bit less. The reason I'm still not too fast picking him, regardless of role, is that I know even though we like picking value at this time of year, at a certain point you do need to, I think, have at least a couple of those guys that you think are going to be top 6 in that line. And the back line, I mean, we could probably get into this and talk about it all day, but the back line is just giving us proper headaches at the moment. And it almost becomes a game of like, you need to pick players back there. Like who do you pick? There's players dropping like flies and whatnot. And so I think for me, Brayshaw is a safe guy that I believe is going to be a top 6 defender, and for me, he's you're saving 100k there to Doc. So I think it's a guy that you can have, and I think it's a guy that you can even start in some scenarios as your D1. To be honest, I've seen a fair few teams that they're not paying up for a Doc in. They've got like a Gus Brayshaw or even a Jordan Dawson, who's not that much more expensive, but someone there that they know is going to be around the top 6, but they're not paying top dollar for Sam Docherty. But I will tell you why you should pay top dollar for Sam Docherty. So I'm going to go through Doc now. But is there a better story? I don't think there's too many better stories than Sam Docherty from last year. I know this is a debate, mate, but I've got to agree with you there. Like, what a top fella.
It came at like everyone didn't think he was going to start last year. Like obviously all the Cairns battles off the field, came back, obviously not looking great after all the Cairns trips up, but comes back and absolutely brains it, to be quite honest. He went from being that guy, like 95 in the first round, you just thought, okay, well, that's just a fantastic score. But then I'll just read you some of his big scores that he had throughout the year. So he had like a 138, 121, 116, 115, 114, 135, 129, 121, 114, 119, 123, and 137. So plenty of scores over 110 out at that stretch there. And just like there's not many defenders that can put up those type of scores. So we did see a fair few years ago that he was the D1 quite clearly. I think he had a high average at that point. I think it's closer to 115 there, but that was obviously coming off not a limited preseason. That was a full preseason. So this year, could he take it back to a 115? Full preseason, there's more like Zach Williams going down with injury. We don't wish injury upon anyone, but that just opens up that more opportunity back there. So now you've only really got Nick Newman back there taking a lot of the touches back there. But we've also seen Doc been playing the midfield and training in the midfield in the preseason. We saw... Yep.
Do you sort of think that Williams injury, how do you think that affects him positionally? Because a lot of people are giving it the thumbs up for the midfield role, but then with Williams down, we think he's going back to half back. You're still comfortable with that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I think it more depends on what do Carlton do, who do they bring in? So do they bring in? I saw Jet put out there that he thought maybe a Jack Carroll would come more into the starting 22, and then they put Doc back. But I've got a suspicion that potentially they might want to get Lockie Cowan back there, which would be good for us for another cash cow coming in there. So then that maybe pushes Doc still in the midfield. I still don't think Doc was going to be playing 60, 70% midfield. I think it was only going to be about maybe that 30, 40%, maybe a little bit less. So I still think he'll get that role because I think with Walsh being out, they still do need another bigger body. And he did play 2 games in the back end there in the midfield. And he scored the 123 and the 137 in round 22 and 23. So he went nuts, but it was his tackle numbers as well that went up as well. He had 10 tackles and 7 tackles. So just on fire. And I just do see him potentially getting back to that 115 mark. But the question I want to throw to you, Luke, is that could he potentially be the defender that is maybe 10 points clear of the next guy? Because I think Dawson, Brayshaw, Sinclair, they're around that 100 mark, but are they going to push that 105? And if Docherty pushes 115, that means he's going to be about 10 points over those guys. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, mate, there's no doubt the answer to that question is absolutely yes. He could be that defender that goes 10 or more points, better than everyone else. It's just the matter there, I guess, is the price. Are you willing to pay for that? And Mitch kind of brought this up on a previous podcast of ours as well. When you pay that much for a player, I guess you want to be confident being able to whack the C on them as well. Is that something that you're confident with, Doc? Because I think people kind of play in this space with Docherty a little bit where it's like, yeah, I'm happy to put the VC on, but I don't know if when push came to shove, I'd be able to put the C. What are your thoughts from that perspective?
Yeah, I think Docherty's one of those players that you can. I think him and Dunkley are the 2 ones out of the midfield that I think you can confidently put a captain on, then obviously a lot of those midfields. But the thing I do like with him as well is that round 1, obviously the annual Carlton-Richmond games are Thursday night. So we're not likely to have an R3 that's going to get named. So if that doesn't happen, Docherty's a perfect VC in round 1. You put the VC on him in the first game. If he goes banging, puts out a 120, you captain the sword in the first game of the season. You're off to a good start.
Especially if he's playing midfield, because Richmond are notoriously, easy to score on for middies. Richmond are one of the teams in the league that just don't tag at all. So it's a good point there if you're looking to round 1, and then like you said, the R3 loophole's available. So
so that's my thinking. And then even if we do get an R3 named and say, for example, Cameron Chester doesn't play, he's a guy I'm considering even starting with if like I get an emergency that goes big, or if I get a VC that goes big, because he's going to get a game at some point. So I like Docherty and paying up. As you said before, we got to pay up for some of these guys to get the top scorers in, because you're going to need them at some point throughout the year anyway. So yeah, I do like starting with Docherty, but we will get into who we'd pick out of the 2 players. So who would you be picking, Luke, out of Sam Docherty and Angus Brayshaw? Are we picking the cheaper guy or the more expensive guy?
And I'm only allowed to pick one here, aren't I, Bales?
Yeah.
I'm trying to weasel my way out of it, mate.
Yeah.
Look, at this stage, I'm gonna say Brayshaw. I think for me, there's that little bit of upside there if he goes in the middle. I'm saving a little bit of cash there, and I'm able to use that cash elsewhere. And something I didn't mention before, I think he actually has a reasonably sort of friendly fixture coming into the season. So he goes Western Bulldogs to start with, friendly. Great, he goes Brisbane and Sydney, not ideal. But then after that, he goes West Coast, Essendon, Richmond, North Melbourne, Gold Coast, Hawthorn. So I think there's some opportunity in there. So if you sort of look at that and say 7 of the first 9 games, you'd be expecting him to ton up pretty comfortably against a lot of those teams.
Not many defenders do that.
Yeah, that for me, I think is good. But we say this, don't we? But it's a bit of a preseason watch as well. So I'm saying Brayshaw right at the moment. But if I see something that makes me sort of balk a little bit during the preseason, the games, that's it's a bit up in the air. But what about you? Who are you locking at the moment?
Well, I was just about to say before I pick about who you're going to pick, who I'm going to go with, but you were saying about what you might sway away from Brayshaw. What would that be? Would that be the role as you're talking about? Would that be the thing that would be probably concerning the most?
I think if I saw, look, I know I mentioned before that I wouldn't be super discouraged if he went down back. But if it was for me and I had to pick Doc or Brayshaw, and it looked like Brayshaw was just going to be exclusive backman, and I was forced into that 50-50 split, I'd probably go Doc. But it's probably to do, we mentioned him before, but it's probably to do with what Christian Petrarca's doing as well, isn't it? It'll be interesting to see what hand Goody plays there, whether he says, no, we're putting the ball in the midfield and we're just going to let him go, or whether they still keep experimenting with that forward role. So many different moving pieces, isn't there? It's just hard to lock anything away. But yeah, if I had to pick one right now, let's lock in Brayshaw.
Well, if I had to pick one out of the two, I'm going Doc. I've had Doc in my team. I was saying you off camera. I've had him in my team pretty much since the start. I started a little bit without him, but then I just thought I've got to start with him. I do think he will be potentially 10 points. I think he'll be at least 5 points better than the next guy. I think he'll be about that 110. The next guy could be 105, and if not, I think he could be 10 points. So, and he's a guy that I know, one of those, we have these guys every year where you don't start with them, and then you're working your way to try and get them in, then you're probably not getting them in until either the back sort of 5, 6, 7 rounds, or you just don't get him because you can't get the coin to get him. So that's why I'd be starting with him. But it is a good point you raised with Brayshaw. If he's playing midfield, then I think there's an argument you could have both. That's the thing. If Brayshaw's playing midfield and you've got Docherty who could be D1, you could start with both. But that leads on to our next point. Have you got one of them? Have you got both? Have you got none? What are you looking like?
Mate, I was trying to have it both ways there for good reason. It's because I've got both of them in there at the moment. So I've got Doc sitting at D1 and Brayshaw sitting at D2. I'm sitting in Mitch's chair at the moment, so it's a pretty classic move for him to try and have it both ways. So, he won't like that when he hears that. But so I've got them both, and I think there's definitely, I almost think that there's a equally as valid argument to argue for having them both, as there is for arguing either way. For all the points you mentioned on Doc, he's potentially a must-have back there. I think you mentioned before you end up trying to scramble to get those guys, and at some points you just can't get them. I think that was Doc for me a little bit last year. So I've learnt my lesson a bit. He's currently in the team, but Brayshaw's currently there as well. So what about yourself?
Yeah, I've got Docherty. I don't have Brayshaw. He's been in and out of D2 spot. I think D2 spot has been probably the hardest position to fill out of all the positions on everyone's field, because you don't know if you're going to pay up for a Dawson, Sinclair, Brayshaw, or if you're going to save a bit of money and go for like a Nick Dacos or a Hayden Young type player and go a bit cheaper. So it is a very interesting position at the moment. But at the moment, I've just got Docherty. I think, as you said, it would depend on role in the preseason against a Brayshaw. If Petrarca, because I know he's injured back end of last year, if he's playing more midfield and Brayshaw's playing more half back, I don't see enough of that upside to go Brayshaw over Docherty. But there's a chance I could start with both. So it would just be interesting to see how it all shapes out.
So who's just for like context as well, who do you see as being the top 6 defenders across the year?
Yeah, so I think Docherty is number one. I'd probably put, I think I've got Dawson. I think I had Dawson at number 2 at the moment. I just think for that security at number 2. I think I then pushed Brayshaw, I think, up to 3 with the basis that he may go in the midfield. I think Sinclair was 4, I think I had. I then think I put Dacos at D5. I think he pushed up himself to D5. And then I think I don't know who I had at D6, but I had could have been a Sicily or a Stewart or even like a Duncan or a Hall or someone like that may be able to keep up those top 6. Obviously, a couple of those guys depend on injury and if they can stay fit. But what about yourself? Have you got similar?
Yeah,
or?
I was pretty similar there. I'd probably moving Dacos down a little bit to maybe like a D6 and then maybe Sicily up into kind of where you had Dacos there, but all pretty similar. The tough thing we're all encountering at the moment is that it's looking more and more like we might have to pay up in defence, and maybe, if we're only given one feasible rookie, maybe it's Jimby in defence, then we'll have to spend a lot of money back there when there's such sort of appetizing guys that we might like to be picking elsewhere, especially in the forward line. So it's been a little bit of a hard one to swallow. I don't know if you've experienced that as well. Having to spend a bit more money in defense to kind of like paper over some cracks and then missing out on some of that potential value up forward. Tough.
Yeah, I did my team reveal video, time this recording a couple of days ago. When this video comes out, would have been nearly a week ago. I think I had Weddle and Jinby on fill, which I know is a little bit risky, but I guess if Chesser does get up and play round 1, which he's been looking good, and then like a Wilmot there as well, if a couple of those guys do play, then I guess it's not as bad, especially if we get all of them playing. But I think that, as Jeppa said on our podcast a few weeks ago, I think one rookie back there is the play if you can get there, and I think Jinby and Jinby, as you mentioned, I think is the guy you want back there. So
it'll all be dictated. I mean, we always say it, don't we? But it'll all sort of be dictated by the rookies that we have available as well. So I think at this time of year, like if you're playing around with a few different structures, that way you've kind of got some contingency built in when those teams get announced. If this happens, well, I know that I go to this structure, but if this happens, I know I've got this structure kind of in the back pocket as well. So good to have a few different tools in the toolkit, I think.
And that's why I pay up a little bit as well for rookies. I know that you and Mitch were talking about that as well on your team reveal video, that you guys pay up a little bit more for rookies, because then in case something happens, you can always go down and get that cash to go up on your field if in worst case scenario. So
no point just dumping a heap of 200Ks in there and your team looks red hot, and then it comes to Thursday night, you're shitting yourself.
Yeah, we all wish that we could have those 200K rookies all on the bench, but unfortunately,
I just scroll right to the bottom of the list and just send them in.
Yeah, 100%. But where can people find your team review video and all the stuff you and Mitch are doing on YouTube? So you got the AFL Fantasy stuff you're doing, and you've also got your basketball content as well. You guys do.
Yeah, mate. We've been busy. I can't lay claim to any of the basketball stuff. That's actually stuff that Mitch sort of does by himself. I wouldn't know my ass from my elbow when it comes to fantasy basketball. So he's your man over there. But yeah, Mitch is at Boys Fantasy on Twitter, and then I'm at LukeRojo17. So obviously, like on Twitter, we send out all the links to the videos and whatnot. But we've got our YouTube videos that come out. We're trying to get sort of 3 a week is the goal at the moment during the preseason. But then each of those videos we just turn into a podcast as well, which you can find on all your podcast platforms. Something that we've been talking about a little bit recently is our lofty goal to try and get to the 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Yeah. So I think we may have just ticked over 500, which is pretty cool. I think.
Congrats, mate. Good milestone there.
Yeah, thank you, mate. I appreciate it. I mean, had you asked us, what did we start? Probably 3 months ago now. Or had you told us that would be the case, I think we both would have told you you're dreaming. So it's been really cool, and it's I think the best part about it, I kind of say this a little bit on the podcast, is just how sort of supportive and together the fantasy community is. It kind of shows 100%. In the fact, you're obviously inviting us on here, and we've had a few guys on the show, and the traders are so generous with their time and on Twitter, and everyone's just kind of out there providing content just to help people out, I think is the main objective. So it's really cool. I'm loving being a part of it. And if you want to sort of get in touch with us over on Twitter or watch any of the content, YouTube or, wherever you get podcasts as well. So.
Yeah, perfect. Well, if anyone hasn't subscribed to the Ball Boys on YouTube, make sure you do. Help them hit that 100K. 100K. That'd be fantastic.
100K,
yeah.
Happy days.
Yeah, the 1K milestone, and I'm on that road as well. So if you can click subscribe onto the video here as well, that'd be very much appreciated. So why not do both? Subscribe to both. You can have both Brayshaw and Docherty, and you can also subscribe to both channels, which would be fantastic.
Hey, 2 birds, 1 stone. I reckon. Get on it.
Yeah, 100%. But no, thank you very much for coming on, Luke. It's been a pleasure having you on. Now I've completed the Ball Boys set on here, which has been fantastic. Got the both guys on, so I'm sure we'll speak to you and Mitch throughout the season as well on either the videos here or on the spaces on Twitter. So been fantastic, mate. Normally I would say where can the guys find Twitter, but you've got that in, so fantastic.
Please do it. No, mate, I'm tempted to stay. I think actually I kind of like it in this seat here. I think I might have to kick Mitch out, directly facing the camera and everything. So
yeah, the next video, you in the seat, Mitch on the other seat.
Yeah,
so.
Mate, I might have to work on my intro. So
perfect. Now, looking forward to all the content you guys are going to release throughout the preseason, then into the actual season. So, thanks for coming on, Luke, and we'll see you guys in the next episode for another head-to-head battle. Catch you then. Cheers.